Good evening, everybody.
Good
Good
evening.
evening, Ken.
It's good to see everyone. We're back fresh from our Pentecost services last week. We had a great time, had some great fellowship, spent a couple of days and got to know some people a little better. It was just kind of a really and perfect weather. Couldn't have asked for better weather. It was absolutely perfect. So if you missed it, maybe you can make it next year. That would be great to see you. But I want to welcome everyone to episode 436 of Line Upon Line. Science fully and unequivocally supports the Bible. So, Dr. Ricks, if you would start us out, that would.
Okay, these are mama and grandmama groaners, just a few. When my brother and my sister and I used to play outside, my mama would yell, if you fall and break your legs, don't come running to me. Grandmother used to say, people keep asking me, what's the secret of my longevity? I just keep living. My mother used to always say, the older you get, the better you get, except for bananas. And grandmother used to say, you know you're getting old when they just put one candle on your cake and see if you can blow it out.
Yeah. When you get into them bigger years, they just go to one. Or now they buy candles. You buy two candles with the numbers on them.
Yeah, that's right.
So one says 5 or 6, and the other one says you can get a lot out of two. I can't.
That's true. Because who wants a cake with 80 candles on it? It's like a forest fire, right?
Set off the smoke detector.
Yeah. Okay. Science fully and unequivocally supports the Bible. We're going to pick it up in some categories. The first one is the Bible is consistent with, if you want to call it cosmology or astronomy, those sciences. And remember, the Bible is an ancient book. Even the New Testament was written 2,000 years ago. And the Old Testament, a good deal of it goes back 3,400 years. And of course, lesser times, but it's a very ancient book. And in those days, they didn't have the tools or instruments to measure things that have been measurable in the last few centuries. And yet the Bible was correct in a number of things. Oh, just a minor thing. This wasn't even one that was in the paper. Do you know that the Bible has the people of Israel washing their hands a lot, especially when they touch certain things? I'm going to all the details. A lot of hand washing and quarantine. You realize not until they discovered microbes and microscopic germs did the reality of why that's such an important thing. Hand washing and quarantining the sick on the outskirts of the camp. The Israelites were told to do that by God because he knew it. And anyway, we're going to all those things right now. But the creator of the universe inspired science. Back in the days of Christopher Columbus, the science of his day thought the world was flat. Christopher Columbus knew that it wasn't flat, and you wouldn't sail off out in the Atlantic and fall off the end and whatever, die. But most of his sailors believed that. And let's look at our first scripture, Isaiah 40, Ken.
It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens.
Circle of the earth. Isn't that amazing? And that's what Christopher Columbus, he and Magellan proved that. The world is round. And he said we can sail west to get to the Far East. Of course, he didn't know there was a new world in between. That's another story. But it is true. You could sail west from Europe and get to the Far East. The world is round. The Bible was right, and the science of Christopher Columbus's day had to be altered. It was wrong.
You know what's sad? There's still people and they're Christians, a lot of them, that think the earth is flat.
You're kidding me.
They believe it. I got it. I mean, people that's been to the feast
Yeah.
think the earth is flat.
Yep.
And these there's some goofy preachers out there that's telling them this trash, and they're believing it. You gotta be kidding me, people.
Well, they're rich.
Pythagoras proved the earth was round how many centuries ago? It's just nuts.
There was a rich guy that just tried to prove that himself. Not last year, I think it was. I can't remember the guy's name, but he is supposed to was going to prove that the earth was flat.
I don't know. I mean, it just goes to show you. I mean, people, people can be tricked.
Yep.
This is kind of nebulous because it's hard to pin people down. But I've seen some preachers who don't know what they think they know. And they are saying the Bible supports things that are unscientific that it doesn't support. But they think it's true. So you can't believe everybody who starts preaching that he's got a good grasp on the Bible. There are some people out there that just, they don't know what they're talking about. What can I say, right?
Yep. And you know what? They got one scripture. They all have the same scripture they pull out of the Bible that talks about the four corners of the earth. They say that proves the earth is flat. Well, then it would also have to prove that the earth was square, too. I mean, it's just nuts.
But they don't realize a lot of things are figures of speech.
Exactly.
Let me give you an example. I realize this is a terrible one, but there was a guy who cut off his hand because the scripture where Christ said, better to get in the kingdom with one eye or one hand, and so cut off your hand. Now, Christ was using an exaggeration to make a point that you should go to the extreme to resist sin. It's not your hand that steals, it's your mind. You can then steal with the left hand. It's crazy. I know what you're going to say. A certain religion does that, but the point is, you have to understand the Bible with common sense.
Absolutely.
And people sometimes take it out of context. But Christ does not want you chopping off your hand because you're a sinner. Well, you just got to work at it. But he does say you might need to go to extremes to get away from sinful influences.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, we could talk more about figures of speech and literature and the four winds and all that. But we know what Christ meant. The Bible also refers to the vast numbers of stars in the heaven and outer space, and that you can't really count them. I'm not saying God can't count them because God says he can, but we can. Would you read the next two scriptures, Ken?
As the host of heaven cannot be numbered, nor the sand of the sea measured, so will I multiply the descendants of David my servant. And then down in Genesis it reads, blessing, I will bless you, and multiplying, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies.
By the way, now that we have the Hubble telescope in space, so there's no atmospheric interference with them searching space with a powerful telescope, the heavens, they still can't see the end of the universe, and they still can't see all the stars. I was reading recently, they thought they saw one distant star, so they kind of focused on it, and they have some photographic stuff they can do over time. It turned out that one tiny pin of light was apparently an entire galaxy. It's just so far away. I thought, wow. In other words, who knows how many stars that galaxy's got? The only point I'm getting at is the galaxy space is enormous. And by the way, it's estimated, and this is just an estimate, which could be wrong, there are 10 to the 21st power number of stars, and there's 10 to the 25th power grains of sand on Earth. Those are both just guesses. Isn't that interesting?
Yep.
The Bible was right. Um, one more thing. The Bible says each star is unique. And that's quite a statement to make. Would you read 1 Corinthians 15:41, Ken?
There is one glory of the sun, another glory of the moon, and another glory of the stars. For one star differs from another star in glory.
Now, we might think, well, what does that really mean? Just how close they are? Guess what? They now have instruments where they can look at the spectra of the light the star emits.
Mhm.
I didn't know this till I read it. Do you know that every star has a spectra signature? As far as they can tell, they're all unique. In other words, when Paul wrote that 2,000 years ago, what he wrote was scientifically accurate. Who would have guessed it?
Right. And he didn't have any instruments telling him that.
God inspired it. That's the only way you can attribute it. By the way, I know this is not part of the paper, but I just want to mention it. I was reading all this stuff about science and creation, and a couple decades ago, they said there'd be many planets like Earth. All you needed was the right temperature, and you could have life on the planet. Well, every time as they study space and planets more and more, they now realize there are over 200 factors that have to exist for life or any life that they can possibly conceive of to exist. That makes Earth one of the rarest things in the universe.
Right.
And the guy was saying, now you think about it, over 200 factors. Doesn't it seem much more logical, instead of Earth just being a fortuitous accident, it was designed?
Yeah, the odds that it happens to be where it is, how it is, and why it is are off the charts to happen by accident.
I read a book called The Impossible Planet by the guy who wrote the original one. His university, he wasn't trying to disprove evolution. He was just looking at all the factors that made Earth special and unique. But when he all added up, it really supported intelligent design so much that they wouldn't give him tenure. They gave him the boot.
Yep.
Because his research didn't prove what they wanted. That's a true story, but it's a great book to read. And I can't remember them all, but things like you have to be where the radiation is the same in your entire orbital loop and a whole bunch of stuff that I never thought of. If our gravity was just a little bit different, we couldn't
So when
exist.
science conflicts with the narrative, it's science that must yield. The narrative must continue.
That's correct.
Yeah. Earth is a very special planet. And the odds of it, all these things just by accident are just, the odds are really big numbers that make it impossible. It means this world was designed. Also, let's look at Jeremiah 31:35, please, Ken.
Thus says the Lord, who gives the sun for light by day and the fixed order of the moon and the stars for light by night, who stirs up the sea so that its waves roar. The Lord of hosts is his name. If this fixed order departs from before me forever.
Now, God did say some other things there about Israel as a nation, but the point I want to make is that, at least for the time being, that fixed order is solid. That's what it means. And one thing that you can count on, you realize that calendars are made based on the heavenly bodies moving, the moon and the sun and all that astrological stuff. And it's very precise. They can make calendars, 4 or 5 years in advance and tell you all that when the sun's going to set and all that almanac stuff and be accurate because the solar system is that methodical.
They can go more than 4 or 5 years. They can go back. They can go back thousands of years and predict what was where things were that far back, and they can go ahead as well.
Yeah, it's like, it's odd because people do this, but we just read out of Genesis, but in Genesis 1:14 is with creation time. It says, God, let there be lights and firmament of the heaven to divide the day and the night, and let them be signs and for seasons and days and years. So God created all this already so that we could have a calendar type thing. Obviously, they'll go by God's calendar, but it was there. God created everything, and He created the lights, and that's the stars that we see. So those were created by God.
I was watching the thing about Stonehenge, and now that they have a chance to study it, it is some kind of astronomical calendar. In other words, the people can watch the shadows and the seasons because I guess that stuff is so predictable. They knew enough how to put the rocks in the right kind of circle. In other words, it's some kind of predictor and calendar. The ancient world realized how orderly the heavenly bodies were. And it makes you wonder, how did they know that? I guess they just figured it out, right?
Well, I got a theory. When you don't have TV and radio and a regular 8-hour job, and you don't have the internet, all you do is watch the world around you. And it's going to get passed down from generation to generation, and you're going to observe your environment because of farming and planting and seasonal things. You're going to know exactly what's going on, when it's going to go on. You're going to be able to be connected to the nature around you far more than we are today.
Yeah, I remember as kids camping out. We'd camp out in our backyard, but one of the things we loved to do was stay up all night. So we'd watch the sunset, and then we'd stay up all night so we could watch the sun rise. Most of it if we could, and we would be able to do that. And for me, I was young. I was probably about 7 or 8, and but for me, that was a huge education because it teaches you that there is a sunset and there is a sunrise. So we were talking about the earth being flat. How can that happen if the earth is flat?
Yeah. By the way, in the days, especially during the Dark Ages when they lost a lot of knowledge, they thought the sun went around the earth instead of vice versa. Right. And I can see where you could make that mistake if you don't really know about all the things we now know. But the sun and the moon working together, that's quite a system. And by the way, not that we know all the details of how it came about, but we assume they were led by God. The high priest in Israel figured out that the sun and the moon create the greatest calendar system in the world when you blend them together. You have to know I think it's twice in every 19-year cycle, we have to add in the 13th month. But don't quote me on those details. I didn't study up on that. But they figured it all out. God helped them figure it out, whatever. And even when it was cloudy, overcast, bad weather, they had it right. Because the world has mathematical precision. Do you know that Einstein, he was a bit of a rogue in some ways. And as a leading scientist, he didn't want to believe in God. He was Jewish. He didn't want to believe in God. But in his latter years, he said, because was a great mathematician, he said the mathematical precision of heavenly bodies was such that it could not be random. And that's why he believed in intelligent design and God. Few people know that. Or if they know it, they never quote it. They only quote the stuff they want you to hear. Even Darwin started to doubt his own theory before he died. Did you know that?
Mm-hmm.
Some people know that, but they never tell you that.
Yeah, you'll never hear that on any of today's TV, that's for sure. But yes, I've heard that. I've heard that, and I remember watching documentaries on that early, or well, I say early in my life, but earlier in my life. Uh, I was always fascinated by science, so I was able in astronomy. I had a telescope when I was very young. That was one of my wishes that I got, every year, and so I would watch the moon. I would be looking at, the stars, what come visible. I learned where Mars is and where Venus is during the, astronomy. So I learned a lot, at a young age about astronomy, and still can come up with it some today. I can still look at certain times of the year and see when I see Jupiter and those kind of things and point them out in the sky. When you got a telescope, it's unbelievable what you can see. It's unbelievable. And so the Hubble telescope is fascinating to me.
Yeah, it gives a better view because the atmosphere is not in the way. They're out in space; they can really see
Right.
stuff. Um, and apparently, even Hubble can't see the end of the universe. I mean, I'm not saying it isn't there; they just haven't been able to find it yet. That gives you some. Although I did hear this on one science show, they they think Earth is put in a position in our Milky Way where we can observe the rest of outer space. We could be deeper in, covered by more whatever you call it, debris. And they said maybe God put man's planet in that position so we could see and appreciate the vastness of the universe. That does kind of make sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's entirely possible. It's entirely possible. So, I mean, I read through the Bible and I read it for what it says. And when it says that, he created all these things, I have to believe, I have no other choice. I have to believe that it was created for us. And I don't see anything in the Bible or anywhere else, especially any science that tells me any different.
Yep. I mean, we got an atmosphere made for life like people, like human beings' life. Perfect mixture of. Someone was once talking about the atmosphere mixture. If there were just more oxygen, it'd be too dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Fires, but less oxygen, you'd have a hard time, having the energy you need. So you need some neutral gases like is helium the big? There's several others. I can get them all mixed up. Of course, you need carbon dioxide for the plants and all that, but um, the atmosphere is what we need.
Think about the carbon dioxide for a second. Deadly to humans, but the plants need it to give us oxygen.
I thought the craziest thing I heard when the EPA said carbon dioxide was a poisonous gas. Wait a minute. That's what plants live off of. And
It's
some
plant
seed
food.
plants live
It's,
off of.
it's plant oxygen is what it
Yeah,
is. They give us the oxygen we need, but we give them the carbon dioxide they need.
it's a perfect symbiotic relationship.
Exactly.
How can CO2 be poisonous?
Well, it's also a circle.
Yeah, it
So,
doesn't make any sense, except, well, I heard that no one knows this, only a few. The real reason they pushed global warming so the government can micromanage everybody, just like socialism.
Well, they want to collapse, and they admitted this. They wanted to collapse capitalism. That's the point of all this carbon tax garbage. It's all garbage. In fact, there was a summit not long ago where somebody at the summit kind of made fun of all this stuff because he knew it and everybody knew it was garbage. But he probably the mistake he made, he did it and someone recorded it, so he's out of a job. They were laughing it up when they were there, but because it got out to the public, now it's not good. He's out of a job.
yeah.
Yeah, the world God made this world for us. And by the way, I'm all for taking care of clean air, clean water, and bury your garbage and feces and underground, all that stuff. But we don't need to go to extremes just to fulfill some over control government radical agenda. Did we read Jeremiah 31:35, Ken?
We're waiting to go to Job 26.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Job 26:7, yes.
He stretches out the north over the world and hangs the earth upon nothing.
When you read that line, the earth is hung upon nothing. In the ancient world, and I hope I get this right, they had all kind of weird ideas like the earth was on the shoulder of Atlas and possibly other ancient figures. Of course, that doesn't make any sense, but that's the kind of thing they believed in. You realize that the earth being hung on nothing, nobody would have thought that in the ancient world.
Yeah, how did he know that? How did he know that, Job? He couldn't have known this.
But if you look, like if you go on a spaceship, and I guess you can on a trip to the moon, and look back at Earth, it's just a beautiful blue marble, but it's hung on nothing. It's out there on its own. Same with the moon, and that's amazing. Now there is a magnetic connection to the sun, but that's still basically an invisible thing. You're hung on nothing. And by the way, there's some new theories about magnetism. You know that the magnetism from our nickel core creates kind of a magnetic shelf around this planet that protects it from certain UV rays. So there's an interaction with magnetism and this planet being a nice place to live that they're just now discovering.
Right.
And apparently the magnetic connection is not a straight line. It's like a slight curve. I'm not sure I understand that. They're rattling off math, but maybe there's even more to magnetism than we thought. Maybe like that.
Isn't there something in the Bible that I thought maybe it was in the Bible that talks about the poles switching? Because it's happened before. And I thought there was something in the Bible that mentioned that. I could be wrong.
There's a theory that the magnetic, whatever they call it, polar north is going to switch around. And I heard them talking about it, but I don't understand it. And I guess we'll find out if polar north starts to move south or something. I don't know.
Well, I heard it. I don't know if I never delved into it, and it just came back to me when we were doing this. But so I thought something was mentioned, and maybe vaguely, so it might not be obvious, but that the poles are going to switch.
Well, the next thing we want to go into is the Bible is consistent with biology and meteorology. Well, the biology is the big one, really big one. I remember talking to a biologist a little bit about intelligent design. He was from Baylor. And he got angry. I mean, the guy just practically, and I'm a nice guy. Why would you get so angry? And my theory is the problem biologists who want to believe in evolution is that their science is hitting him in the face every day. The more they study, because the building blocks of life are the cell, the more they study the nucleus of cells, the more complexity in design they find. And it is almost, it is impossible to believe. You know, Darwin thought, his original thought on the eye was there was a simple little cell that was light sensitive. And it was on a little animal. And over time, that light sensitive little cell hooked up to the brain and we got eyesight and they got a little bit better. Guess what? There is no such thing as a simple little cell. Every cell and every animal and every plant is complex, and they probably don't even yet understand it all. Of course, Darwin couldn't have known that. He just thought it was like a little piece of protoplasm, a building block. But boy, was he wrong. Because you might see that in some Old biology books, the simple one-cell animal. There ain't no simple one-cell animal. I mean, there are one-cell animals, but they're not simple. Um, let's go to Job 28, please.
When he gave to the wind its weight and meted out the waters by measure.
They now have instruments. They know air weighs something. They didn't know that in the past. They now have ways to measure all that stuff. Let's go to Ecclesiastes 1:7.
All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place from which the rivers come, there they return again.
You know, I saw this at a science museum. It might have been Chicago Science Museum, one of the big ones, or it might have been in, well, I better not say where. My memory might be off. It's a giant museum. And they had the water system of the planet diagrammed. And, you know, there are underground waters, underground rivers, and surface rivers and lakes. They all flow into the ocean. And then from the ocean, it evaporates into miles and miles of tons of waters in the cloud, which come down as rain. But you know, the planet maintains its amount of water. Isn't that amazing? And the oceans don't get too salty or too fresh. Isn't that amazing?
Yes. Yeah,
And they tried to duplicate that in a giant, big globe type thing with water and a little place where some living creatures lived, and it was out in the sunlight. Everything went dead pretty soon. Apparently, it's harder to do than it appears to be.
I'm sure.
Yeah. I lived in the country and had a house, and we had to dig a well. And where I lived at was one of the largest underground rivers in the nation. And so when they drilled the well and went into the river, I could never get nothing but silty water. So I had to change my filters out quite often. And so for me, as you know, penny pincher as I am, I decided to just let the water run. And so that way I didn't have to clean out my filters in my house all the time. And it was probably about 3 months. I was able to fill up a pond and made a pond that had fish and everything in it, because fish, I guess birds drop them off or whatever. But it was amazing. The guy said that I was getting, I forgot, it was an astronomical amount of gallons per minute of water. And he said, I'm on a river and it's always going to be sandy and silty.
So that's what underground rivers are like, huh?
Yeah, well, that's what he told me. He said, you know, it's not he said in that area where I lived at that particular time, he said that whole city is on top of an underground river. It was unbelievable. He said everybody's in rivers. They all have to do the same things. So you've seen a lot of little spot lakes now know how they got there.
That is cute. What if you had clay soil like around here? Would clay soil not have sand in the river, underground rivers?
It's silt. It's you know, I mean, we have clay. We have Georgia red clay, and but it's the silt, because it was like I think I was maybe like 100-foot well or something of that nature, and so we were down there. So by that, you know, you don't really have the red clay there, but it was just amazing. You know, when the guy was drilling, I was there when he was drilling it. And we were talking about it, and he said, man, he said, you got so much water here. He said, this is going to cause you a problem unless you do something. And he was the one that told me, advised me just to run the water outside so that I'm not having to, you know, change out my filters. About 4 or 5 times into the filter within the 6-month period, I said, okay, I'm going to take his advice.
You needed a settling tank.
Yeah, well, yeah, but you know, at that time, didn't have that kind of money, so I had to get what I could get.
Well, that's good. So you got your own pond, made your own pond.
I made my own pond. I mean, it was probably, you know, about an acre pond. I lived on 5 acres, and one of my acres turned out to be a pond when it was all dry land.
Did you end up with tadpoles and all that stuff?
Oh yeah, the fish. What? I don't know how it happens, but I know birds transport fish. So there would be fish and frogs and tadpoles, absolutely, yeah. And it wound up having, bass and all kind of fish in it.
When I was a kid, we loved tadpoles in the pond. But anyway, but that pond may have come from other sources besides underground river. But that's really interesting. When all that underground water is part of a system that ends up in the ocean, and the oceans, and somehow, and the ice, by the way, and the poles are part of that water factor. Don't ask me how, but it's all calculated in nature, and our water stays in the system. And the water level, ocean levels change very little, in spite of what you've heard about. Oh, the lake fronts are going to be flooded. Do you know they can go to London, where ships have been sailing from the same ports in St. James for like 6 centuries, and they can show you the watermark where it was, 1550, and where it is now. There's not. I remember doing that. It's not much difference. Isn't that amazing?
Right.
And you would think, wow. And I know. I remember that time they made a big fuss that there's the South Pole polar ice was all melting, and the oceans would overflood all the sea. Do you remember all that?
That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. There's no land in the South Pole.
Right.
It's all floating in the ocean.
Yep.
It can't. If it all melted, the ocean wouldn't move a thousandth of an inch because it's already floating in the ocean.
Well, the funny thing is, the year that they sent an explorer down there to just photograph it so they could convince people that yes, it's true, the South Pole is melting. There was so much ice, the boat couldn't get close to Antarctica. It got locked in by ice.
I remember that.
Then they sent a boat to rescue it, and it got locked in by ice.
It got, the Russians
yeah.
sent a boat in, and
remember.
it got blocked by the ice.
Yep.
And I think they rescued them by helicopter or something. They got saved, but the media never said anything about the experiment was totally. We don't want people to realize this global warming stuff was wrong, so they didn't mention why they were down. They get stuck in all the ice.
Sometimes I wonder if God doesn't do that stuff on purpose, just to show them how stupid they are.
They've had often cold weather at some of the global warming summits. That's actually happened 3 or 4 years. I've been reading about it. Like God is chuckling. Point is, God controls the aqua system on this planet, and it works. And when Christ comes back and God blesses the world more so, I'll bet you, we know that it says the desert will bloom like a rose. You take places like the Sahara Desert, which is like an ocean of sand, it will turn out to be a gorgeous place. You wait and see.
Oh, yeah.
I predict it. However God chooses to do it, I'm sure he has a great plan for doing it. But anyway.
Well, there's that theory that the Earth used to be like a terrarium.
And by the way, do you know they found mastodons and saber-toothed tigers up near the North Pole, frozen in the ice? That's why they're so well preserved. That means that part of the world had to be a whole lot warmer than it is now.
Yeah.
And Carl Hill thinks that maybe Noah's flood changed it, and or God changed the climate so men would die younger, because if they lived so long, they did more evil when they could live 500 years.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. Plus, I mean, the pressures that were created because of the layer of water. Well, they had a layer of water in the atmosphere, and it just makes perfect sense. That's where a lot of the water came from, was that shield of water around the Earth, which would have helped keep out radiation from the sun and help their skin not to age so fast. All that stuff makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So God made us a little tougher planet because people are so bad. I mean, the way it's written, they were bad. I mean, God knew they were bad, but even God was shocked at how bad they were. So, you know, and probably this is just my crazy mind going. We were in the grocery store today and we saw more people with weird hair colors and weird clothing and fuchsia hair and just weird stuff. And it's almost like weird is now normal. Am I just getting old or what?
Nope. If you don't have tattoos and holes you weren't born with, you are a rebel because you know everybody else has got all that stuff.
We were in a restaurant one day, and I was with my two bosses, and the waiter came over and was taking the order, and so my boss had to repeat it a couple times. And I said, I don't know why he can't hear you. You got them big old holes in his ear. so, so they got a chuckle out of that, but they don't, they tell me, don't say that at work. I said, I understand. so.
I was getting my hair cut one day, and this girl, she had tattoos all over her and all this stuff, and she was I asked her, why do you do this? She's talking about being such a big rebel. I wanted to be different, all this stuff. I said, you do realize that everybody does that. It's just old dudes that don't have none of that are actually the rebels now.
Yeah.
And she thought, and she was, I thought she was going to have to sit down. She realized, wait a minute, I'm just like everybody else.
Right.
It's you that are the one that's bucking the trend. And that she was messed up. I mean, you could tell she was not happy when I told her that.
Right.
Just lose the poor woman. But the world is getting crazy, and we may see more crazy violence like on the other side of the flood, too, as the world gets crazier. I guess only time will tell what we're going to see, but brace yourself. Leviticus 17:11.
For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it for you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls, for it is the blood that makes atonement by reason of the life.
And realize blood is the core ingredient of life. And of course, there's so much you could say about blood. And not until recent centuries did people realize the importance of blood. Matter of fact, in many cases, when people are wounded, they don't die of the wound so much as they bleed out before they get to the hospital and get infusion and other things. By the way, it's believed that George Washington died because in his day and age, the medical people thought if you bleeding people was a treatment. And they bled him to fight an infection, and that probably cost him his life.
Yep.
And by the way, that's why sharing needles is so dangerous, because the moment you put needle in your vein, blood gets on it. Then if you share that needle with someone else, whatever infection was in your blood or problem will be given to them. And I believe sharing needles is one of the reasons so many people are so diseased now.
Yep.
But I guess a lot of far left cities give free needles to save people from contamination. But that doesn't solve the problem either.
It just supports their habit even more.
Yep.
And using needles, unless you know how to use them antiseptically, you may make yourself sicker.
But you're not thinking of that when you're trying to get high.
Yeah, that's true. We heard a famous politician told her followers that when you're getting high and shooting up this weekend, be sure and check the drugs for fentanyl. Costing their voters. I'm not making that up. Tested for fentanyl. The world is going down. And also something that they now know that species cannot jump. A lot of the sci-fi movies, they always jump from a wolf to a man, half wolf, or a whole bunch of those we've seen. But actually, species cannot jump from one species to another, which is in the Bible. You might read the next two Genesis scriptures, please, Ken.
So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the cattle according to their kinds, and everything that creeps upon the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good.
Now, the question we're going to ask is, how does God maintain that separation of species and, species reproduce themselves? He does it through something called DNA code. And it's one of the greatest discoveries of modern biology. And they're still discovering more. Best I understand it, obviously, it's detail, but you inherit genes from both parents. And those genes combine, to create the unique human being, the embryo that you're going to be. And when those two genes combine, there's a double helix. I'm going to try to describe it, but I probably do good. A double helix at certain points where the genes match up. You get some from your one parent and some from the other parent. So every human being is unique. And then on the underneath side of the double helix, it's like a genetic code that's written in the DNA, and it's similar to a computer code, but it's a biological version of what we consider a computer code. And what they now know is any life has to have a vast amount of information. So every cell knows what it's supposed to do. And that's something they didn't know until recently. And by the way, the whole universe is fine-tuned, but we're going to just look mostly at biology here. But they say that the fine-tuning in the universe, which includes the planet Earth and a bunch of other stuff, happening by blind chance. There are a number of statistics. One is 10 to the 125th power. That's 125 zeros after the one. I can't even imagine a number like that. Can you? That's the chances of all this fine-tuning in our universe happening to be by accident. But let's move just to living organisms. They call it the DNA enigma. Every living organism is controlled by this computer-like code. Two scientists, Francis Crick and James Watson, in 1953 discovered this double helix, in the core of every cell, nucleus of every cell. And they realized it allows that cell to reproduce the code it got from the genetic code from the parents. So that the proteins that you make are controlled by the programming that you got from your parents. But since your parents were unique, you're unique. And here's something that I think is interesting. We know, of course, that all the major things like the working of your organs and hair and eye color and all that stuff, and how soon you're going to lose your hair, all that's genetics. But they now believe even subtle things are also genetic. Like, for instance, some people are more prone to getting diabetes based on genetics. Some people are more prone to getting Alzheimer's. Doesn't mean you're going to get it, but you have to, let's say, be careful of your diet more than somebody else. And also, personality tendencies are inherited. Isn't that unbelievable? Things that are so subtle, you can't even see them. I'm thinking, wow, all those things are inherited. And I bet you that we have no full catalog of all human behavior that's yet controlled by genes. But as they start studying this stuff, they're finding different, because see, a lot of diseases are genetically triggered. So they're honing in on which genes make you prone to which diseases. And of course, if you have a gene malfunction, that is a disease. They try to figure out how to solve it. But isn't that amazing that the genetic code is everything?
Yeah, the genetic code needs to stay in God's hands, because you can see man's hands is going to wreck it. And I don't know. It's a theory of mine. I'm thinking that the labs that the Wuhan lab and all those, that's what they're trying to do at this point in time. Scientists are trying to take something and create a disease that'll affect a human being in a certain way. And that when they accidentally have these things, it tends to escape. And then you have the whole COVID thing that came on. So I think they're trying to do that. In my estimation, they're trying to do it in the name of warfare.
Biological warfare is a scary thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they haven't really unleashed it on the world yet, but there are threats of it. I remember the senator from Kentucky, Rand Paul, I think that's his name. He accused Fauci of funding the Wuhan lab to do
gain of research.
What do you call it?
Gain of research.
Gain of research function, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, they look at the genes of a virus. By the way, viruses, I remember being in one biology class, we had a debate whether viruses were alive or not. And viruses, unlike other animals, they're not even a cell. They're a sub-cell bunch of genetic stuff that gets into cells, makes them reproduce the virus, whatever it is, little thing it is, and it also often poisons the cell. Obviously, it's not designed to kill off everybody, or it would not be able to reproduce or survive, but it often kills off the weak. But whether it's alive or not, they try to give more genetic power to this virus, because it's just a bunch of basically genetic codes in a little ball or something like that.
Proteins.
And gain a function. And they think they did. They took a bat virus and messed with the genes and made it more potent.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm assuming that they were able to add something to the gene and make it do stuff it didn't do before. And that's why it's dangerous. Isn't that scary? That people can go in a lab and do something that dangerous?
Why? There's only one reason for that.
Yep.
And they're doing that. Genetic research was done in labs, even in Ukraine, and places where they can get away with that. In China, that dangerous stuff. And I realize in war, you design a virus to kill your enemies, and you vaccinate your people so yours won't die, only they will die. But that's the kind of thing that will easily get out of control, right? It will get out of control, like poison gas in World War I. Yeah, it looked good at first, but it ended up hurting both sides, actually. It wasn't a good idea after all. Yeah, that's scary. People messing with that sort of thing. Obviously, we can't be sure what the Wuhan lab did, because the Chinese cleaned up the evidence and they're admitting to no guilt. Right?
Of course.
And everybody thinks Fauci is a hero, St. Fauci, so nobody's going to really investigate him, right?
No.
All I can say is this DNA is something remarkable. Let's go to Psalms 139, please, Ken.
I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well.
And here's what I think happens. You inherit this code. This code helps the body create a DNA mechanism, and that directs your RNA to direct molecular machines that are in every cell to make all the molecules that that body needs to do whatever those cells do. You know, like different cells do different things, and to fit into a bigger system. And there's no way you can look at something like that and say, does not have a designer. It's a real problem for evolution. And I just saw this in one of the videos discussing it. They create all kinds of proteins. It said if there's a protein with 150 amino acids in sequence, but the code has to get them in the right place, right configuration, and right sequence. The odds of that happening by chance are 10 to the 164 power. And that's only one protein. You may have to do a number of proteins. You start thinking about that. These stats just blow your mind. They're so unreal. There's no way that could happen without a designer, and a very clever designer at that.
Yeah, math does not support evolution in any way, shape, or form.
And there's something called the law of entropy, and it's one of those laws of physics. It says that any system over time won't get better and better and more complex and more efficient. It'll go the other way. It will start to wear out, wear down, get dirty, break down. You know, the law of entropy says you'll get disorder unless someone comes in with a repair system, maintenance system, etc. So this idea that the universe will randomly create more and more complex cells and write more and more complex code is anti-science, actually. It's unscientific.
Yep.
And a famous scientist and code expert said the code that's found in the genetic sequence and in DNA is more complex than any computer programmer that we have today. It's not just complex stuff, it's the best. And they gave an example of, apparently in Boeing, they have people who can write code, and they send this code to machines in the factory, and it tells the machines in the factory where to put the rivets in airplane wings and do certain mechanical things. Well, that's what the genetic DNA code does for the cell. It tells the cell how all these molecular machines should create molecules to do whatever that cell is supposed to do, how it fits into the rest of the body. I thought, wow, that's amazing. And because this information is required, none of that Darwin knew, and it just blows evolution to smithereens. So the question is, do you think most people even realize that science no longer supports evolution?
Nope, they don't, and they're not. They're going to hang on to that because if they start slipping back into a God-created universe, then all their narratives go out the window. So they're not going to turn loose of what power they've gained by using evolution as a tool.
See, the one thing that Darwin, his core was natural selection, or a selection of the fittest or the strongest. The only problem with that theory is that you have to have the species there with all the right information doing whatever that species does, or that variety of that species does, to pick the one that's fittest. So it's true, selection of the fittest would help that species thrive in a certain environment and maybe dominate in a certain environment, but it won't tell you how it got those talents. In other words, how did it get all that programming? In other words, say I'm giving an example of a simple wolf. Say you had a wolf with very long, tough fur in an Arctic environment, and other wolves that didn't have it. Well, obviously the one that could handle the weather better would survive and dominate. The others would probably either have to leave or die out. But how did that wolf with the long, heavy fur get the genetic information to do what he's doing?
That's adaptation. That's not
Yeah,
evolution.
Yeah.
That's adaptation, and the wolf didn't turn into uh, a whale.
And by the way, you could even make an argument the ability to make certain adaptations is also part of the genetic code. I'm not sure I can even explain it, but I think that makes sense. Some animals, both in ocean and land, have certain adaptability, and we believe much of that is already in their genetic code that they can adapt. Obviously, if the only ones that survived over a long period of time are the ones who had long hair, then in the future they could not go back to a warm climate. Maybe they've gotten so pure in their genetic selection that adapt. But the original general species probably had a lot of genetic material that could adapt. Does that make sense, Ken?
Yeah, and you know what? All dogs come from wolves. I mean, it started with wolves, and all dogs and they've been breeding for thousands of years to create different types of dogs, but they all came from one group, but they didn't come from cats. They didn't come from minks. They didn't come from raccoons. They were dogs. They've always been dogs, and they'll always be dogs. The wolf. The base animal that it all started with. They didn't come from another species. It's still the same species.
And probably the original species may have had enough genetic variety that it could, depending on the environment, eventually go in several directions. Thickness of coat, length of the hair, keep it warm or less of it, and maybe some other things too. But that's part of the genetic makeup as well. And then there's the greatest creation of all, mankind. And I know that sounds strange when I say it, but the mind of man is a fabulous thing. I know we're getting perverted and we're all screwed up, but still, think about putting a genetic code that would make your brain do the things your brain does.
Oh yeah, and years ago they was saying in order for man to come up with something that can do what the brain could do, it would have to be, I don't forget, like as big as a giant building or anything. They haven't made much progress. There's no way they could create a computer that could handle the amount of switches or transactions. I'm trying to think of the word I'm looking for.
Processes.
It just can't do it. They can't come up.
Just from a science fiction, and I like science fiction too, they always make the robots who are more human than humans and are more creative and smarter than humans. And that always sounds wonderful for sci-fi. But isn't the reality you can make machines that are better clerical, do all kinds of stuff. But when it gets down to creative thinking and flexibility, no robot can really do that. Isn't that still true, Ken?
No, there's nothing that can compare to. Now, they can get one that can sit. I mean, they can make a partial robot that can sit there and look and react and can kind of have facial features and functions that kind of creep you out because they're pretty good. But they can't. It's not on its own doing it.
Yeah. And I'm not saying they may come with better computers and AI and all that, which is a tribute to man to be able to invent that sort of thing. But there's a certain depth of feeling, creativity, something is even hard to put in words that people have. And that may be the greatest creation of God. Because, like you say, you got to have a designer to put in that information. Survival of the fittest doesn't prove anything except someone created some variety in this animal, and the fittest variety will dominate. But somebody had to create it.
They still haven't come anywhere near creating an robot or any kind of device that has the intelligence and capabilities of the most tiniest bug, an ant, a gnat. They can't reproduce that even in a large form. They can't produce anything they can do, and they just can't. They're just so far.
You know what's amazing? We have little bitty ants. They're worse in Florida, actually, than are here. And their brain is probably the size of a couple grains of salt. But do you realize that? Because we tried to keep them out of the sugar for our hummingbirds. And it seems like if we put down Vaseline, ant, bug spray, they figure out that's just where the sugar water is. They're just a stupid little ant, but they're smarter than you might think. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Yeah, they find a way.
And of course, mankind is more clever, obviously, and even when it comes to this crime thing. Well, we outlaw guns, criminals won't get guns. Now we probably should work a little harder to keep crazy people and disturbed people and really young disturbed people away from guns. But you and I both know criminals are clever enough that if guns are around, they will find a way to get them. You wait and see.
Well, that guy that was with Kavanaugh, what was he? He was armed with a pistol, a knife, several other defensive type weapons or offensive type weapons that had nothing to do with the gun. He had one gun, but he had several other weapons. So if he couldn't use his gun, he was going to find a way to get there. So
yeah, it's like people are clever when it comes to all things, including mischief.
Yep.
And it's like I have an opinion about the gun thing. I mean, if they can work out ways to keep guns away from bad people, that's good. But if they try what they did with alcohol, prohibition, and they say we're going to have a prohibition against guns, like we had a prohibition against alcohol, you realize prohibition against alcohol made it worse, and enriched gangsters in the process. Prohibition against guns, at least not in the environment that America has, will not work. You'll outlaw guns, and then only the outlaws will have guns. And you see, you're going to see how that's going to work. It's going to be worse. If I were a crazy criminal, I got a gun, I'd go to a no-gun zone, a gun-free zone, right? So anyway, don't want to scare anybody. I know everybody wants to get rid of the guns, and we'll see what they come up with. But I always fear that the long-term effect is to undermine self-defense of good people. And that's the scary part. Well, let's see. We have one more scripture. Did we read Psalms 8:3? Okay. Well, if you don't want to read it, just put it up on the screen.
No, I got it. My allergies are just brutal right now. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you visit him? For you have made him a little lower than the angels, and you have crowned him with glory and honor, and you have put all things under his feet.
Paul, by the way, quotes the same scripture. And you realize that this world is made for us, for man. That's how important man is in the eyes of God. He designed all this for us. And we true believers can benefit from that if we stay faithful to the end. Any thoughts, Ken Estes, about how we're going to stay faithful to the end as the world goes, whichever way it's going to go? It's probably going to go negative.
Well, you just, all I know is the prayers that are put out there, and I see, people getting healed and healings going on. I told you guys about Marvin Kelly. He's, as of tomorrow, he starts back on pureed food. They didn't even expect him to live. And, so there's so many people praying for the man, and just keep on praying for him. They're still in the hospital, but I went and seen him, and I wouldn't have never thought he'd make it this far. So he's doing better, standing up, walking around, see these prayers work. That's my faith builder.
Robert Nunemy, they thought last year he would die of COVID for sure, and
Mm-hmm.
he's up and doing well.
Yep, and I know everybody was praying for him just as well. So to me, that's my faith builder, and these answered prayers that I see over and over again. Sometimes we forget them, I guess, but they just build my faith.
Well, I guess if you don't have anything else to mention, I'll bring this to a close. I want to thank everyone for watching. I hope everyone enjoys their Sabbath, and I hope to see you again back here next Sabbath. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
We're happy you could make it, and so glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.